So I'm going to make a presumption here. All right. And the presumption that I'm going to make is that you guys know what PBS is. Yeah. So this isn't a presentation to garner support for positive behaviour support, but this is about how to garner support for positive behaviour support in some respects. So I'm making some presumptions. One, that you know what PBS is, and there's a bit of a description there on the screen. And two, that you're familiar with some of the kind of key documents around understanding positive behaviour support. 10 key components of PBS, the 4 composites from Anne MacDonald, the PBS competence framework, and the PBS Academy standards. Now, I'm not saying they're the be all and end all, but they're really important documents to help understand PBS. And if you're on here wondering about how to garner PBS support anywhere, and you're not familiar with these documents, that's one of the first recommendations, that you get familiar with some of these documents. Because if you can talk about this, then you're much more likely to be able to garner support for PBS. You need to understand what we're trying to garner support for, I guess. So I'm going to presume that you already know how useful a PBS framework is. So I'm not going to bang on about that. I'm going to presume that you see it as a framework and that PBS isn't a particular model of therapy. Again, happy to take questions on that towards the end. ABA is the primary constructional approach within the framework. But we do, in component 6, those of you guys that know it, use other complementary evidence-based approaches. And again, I think this is a really important point in terms of garnering PBS support. I've found when people have been evangelizing about ABA that sometimes turns some people off. And I think the framework of PBS enables us to use other complementary evidence-based supports. And that's a really great way of garnering support with people. We're not trying to get them to wipe the slate clean and start again. What we do as PBS practitioners is we come in and we look to see where we can support and supplement and help that system, whether that's working with children in a family home, whether that's in hospitals across wards. Think about PBS in some ways when it's being newly introduced as a renovation project. You don't knock your house down and start again when you do some decorating. We're strategic about it. So the title of this presentation might seem a bit lofty. I have a dream, and I'm sure that people have put 2 and 2 together and gone back to the great Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, I have a dream. Now, where did this come from? Well, I was watching a TED Talk a little while back. Simon Sinek, I don't know if people are familiar with it. It's quite a famous TED Talk, and it talks about the start with why. And it's talking about purpose in many respects. And one of the things that he talks about in this presentation about helping people find their why, helping people find their purpose. And he talks about the great speech from Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech. And he asks a question. And he said, how would that speech on that balcony that day have sounded if he started with, I have a plan? And I thought it was very interesting. You know, I have a dream. It encourages you to become involved rather than tells you. It invites you rather than commands you to be involved. And it shares the power. And in many respects, I think that's similar to kind of garner support for PBS. And that quote that he has there, the role of a leader to come up with all the great ideas, it's not, sorry. The role of a leader is to create an environment in which great ideas can happen. And in some respects, I feel the same about PBS. That's what we should be doing as PBS. We're there to kind of prompt and tease out and help empower the great ideas of other people in many respects, not to come with that plan about this is how you guys need to change. So that's one of the first things to think about. How do you pitch your offer to the people that you're working with, whether that's a family, a school, a hospital ward, whatever it might be. So yeah, I have a dream versus I have a plan. And again, I think that many of us previously, myself included, have made those mistakes, going in too heavy with the plan at first. So this is cool. As you guys will well know, I'm sure, one size does not fit all. And you just heard Hannah at the start of the day talking about the differentiation of projects, and that some of the feedback we got was that it might have been useful not to have such a diverse group. Again, there's 2 schools of thought on that, but anyway. I know that there's a range of you out there, and you'll be doing different things. You might be head of a department in a trust. You might be working as a sole PBS practitioner in an organisation. You might be part of a team. You might be working with a family. You might be in a school. There's such a range here, so it's difficult to give one presentation that's going to meet all of that. But these are some kind of broad principles that we wanted to share in some respects. So again, as you can see here, the PBS competence framework talks about PBS can be implemented in a range of settings, and again, it's different in all of those settings. Talks about implemented with a variety of people, and again, 2012, I believe, the competence framework. So we've come quite a long way now. There's evidence of application of PBS in a wider variety of settings. Not as much, but there's an emerging evidence of it as well. So again, difficult to do one presentation that meets all of that, and that's why I'm encouraging you guys to ask questions if you can. And that's the other thing to ask about, actually, yeah. So try and look at this with particular lenses on. If the examples I give might not speak to your particular circumstance and what you're hoping to get out of this, have a think about it, because I've tried to be as generic as possible. So have a think about using different lenses, and when we talk about something, how might that apply to your situation? It's context specific. Garnering support is context specific, and again, that's another important takeaway, I think. So I'm just going to run you through a couple of scenarios. One of the ways I've tried thinking about this, because there's so many different ways of dividing it up, was to think about, okay, how do we look at this if you get full support for what it is that you're trying to implement? What are you going to do if you get some support, some resistance? And what are you going to do if we get significant resistance? And in some respects, I think that there's similarities here to our tiered system of PBS. So again, I'm presuming that you know what that tiered model of PBS is. Really useful. If you don't, again, it's something I'd recommend that you go and get your head around. Really helpful. And this is a continuum of support. We talk about this tiered system as a continuum of support. So that bottom tier, everybody gets that. Then the next tier up is if people still have behavioural needs, or there's incidents, what are those evidence-based strategies we're going to use for that, for your population, to try and improve the quality of outcomes? And for some people, that might not be enough. So we're going to need full and comprehensive functional behaviour assessment, perhaps functional analysis in the development of support plans. Well, I think the garnering of PBS support is very similar to, actually, that there are some strategies that are useful in all circumstances, whether you've got full support or not. And then we go through this continuum. So that's how I've tried developing this presentation today. It's a continuum of support. We're going to look at those strategies that will hopefully help people garner support straight off the bat. Then what to do if you're experiencing some challenges, and then a couple of ideas for those really extreme cases. I think it's also probably important to point out that actually, I think most times you're looking to kind of implement PBS, there's going to be some resistance, a little bit, somewhere. So again, get ready for it, get prepared for it, it's coming. Now, so what we're going to do, if you get full support from people, if you get full support, what do? Pass go, collect £200, put your cape on and all that kind of stuff? Well, no, actually, it's a good start. Slow your roll, my friend. Yeah, slow your roll. So have a think about, what does this mean? We need to treat that support very carefully. Take that assent carefully. Take ownership of the responsibilities of being a leader. And listen to that as well. That's not saying be a leader. It's take responsibility for being a leader. And there's a load of things within that, so really key for me is about preparation. Prepare to work with people. Your non-technical skills, I'm not going to go into that, which is great because Leah's going to go into that this afternoon. You've got a presentation on non-technical skills, which are great, and it'll be a good supplement to this, hopefully. Good practice around setting objectives. And really, for me, people that know me well are going to hear contextual fit. Understand the contextual fit of what you're trying to implement. Whatever that is, whether it's a family home, school, whatever, any setting. And the things that we need to look at in contextual fit is the need there for what we're trying to implement? Can we be precise, and can we describe what that is to other people? Is the resource availability there to implement that? Is there readiness for implementation? And is there the capacity to implement that. Because if there's not, there might be a lot of people saying, yes, we want this to go ahead, but the challenge there is that it's unlikely to link to a successful outcomes if we haven't addressed some of those. You may get lucky, but it's good practice, and the responsibilities, I think, of being a leader on a program like that are that you take care of that, you do your due diligence, and we have a look at that kind of stuff first. So the other thing is about engaging your key stakeholders, really important, and engaging your key stakeholders in assessing, planning, implementing, and evaluating. So to keep it really kind of clear, that pie, mnemonic, but perfect, I think. And there's lots of kind of change management, project management stuff. Basic, assess, plan, implement, evaluate are the core principles of most behavior change strategies. Now, the other thing to be clear about here, it's really important, is do you know who those key stakeholders are? So if you're working with a family, have you spoken to both parents? Have you spoken to the siblings? You know, whoever that might be. If you're in a care home environment, do you know who the real change agents in that staff team are? Very often we get lots of people that are talking to us in a service or a system. Are those guys responsible for what happens? Are they the leaders out on the, you know, in terms of practice out there? And there can be informal cultures of leadership that are happening within services or settings or systems. So again, it's important to understand who the key stakeholders are. And the real key here is engage them. So if you're working with families, engage and speak. If you're working with care homes, don't just speak to the manager, speak to the staff, speak to the people that live there, speak to the families if you can. Really engaging those key stakeholders and spending time getting to know, if you can, if possible. Don't always come in with objectives and agendas. Sometimes if you can share time speaking to people, it's going to really help you garner that support. Start to build some of those relationships. And again, some of the soft skills that Leah will talk about later. Yeah, so again, as well as recognizing those key stakeholders, be clear about who the decision makers might be as well. If you're doing system-wide type work, are we able to speak to people that have responsibilities for the budget? What that's going to mean, release of staff, can we ready people and prepare people well for what's coming? Listen actively. So when we engage with people, listen actively. Use active listening skills. That's pretty common within PBS. So use those active listening skills. You may need to empower others to find their voice. Just because somebody might not be saying something doesn't mean that their voice isn't important and it's not important to hear them. And we can miss that stuff sometimes when we move too quickly too. So spend time engaging people, ask questions. Don't go in with that plan, ask questions. And be prepared to answer lots of questions too. Also within this, we talk about finding out people's communication preferences. You know, if you're doing a large piece of work, how do people want to be communicated? Weekly update, monthly update, phone calls, whatever that might be. And that links in with our next point about tailor your service. And as Hannah mentioned, you know, the training that we put on, people would like there to be more differentiation within that. It's a great takeaway point from us, and that will help us garner support as we move forward to tailor it. I now understand that you need a different language when you're speaking to foster families to when you're speaking to people in a hospital setting, perhaps. So be clear about tailoring your language. Use specific language, use specific training, use specific case studies, and be clear about the outcomes of PBS in those different settings, and be honest about it. If there isn't as deep a research pool for the implementation of PBS at hospital settings, engage with people there to explore that, because there is emerging evidence. And the reality of trying to implement anything in some of those hospital settings is it can be hard work and there's suboptimal implementation. It doesn't help to go pointing that out when you're trying to implement PBS either, by the way. So have a think about that. Also learn how to sequence things. When you're tailoring, you're making it fit for that individual, right? That setting. So tailor things for people. And when we think about that, we're thinking about the sequence. So sometimes we might need to get a staff team on side before we get somebody else on side. Be mindful about that. And that's also one of the things that's really useful. When you spend time with people, engaging those key stakeholders, you're likely to find out who you're going to need to spend time with and where that might be as well. So tailor it. If you're working with children, adults, hospital, community, it's going to need a slightly different iteration of what you're doing. The core principles remain the same, but it's going to need some slightly different dressing in many respects. To that point, with regards to tailoring, it's just a quick one. Some of you guys may know this individual here. It's Kipchoge, who broke the world record for marathon. It was assisted, and he had his pacemakers. And I think that's really, not as in a heart pacemaker you get from the video. And I think one of the really important things here is to be considerate of pace. You know, if you are an experienced PBS practitioner, you're likely to be able to move quickly through some phases of your project, whatever that is, whether that's working with a family, again, all that kind of stuff. Be clear about that. You know, if you have been fortunate enough to gain lots of experience and knowledge in that particular area, you know how hard that was to get that, and how hard it was to, how much time it took. Be conscious of that when you're working with other people. And just like a good pacemaker here for Kipchoge, they take some of the burden of that race initially. They're preparing Kipchoge that when he needs to make that drive to really perform, that he's ready, that he's fresh in some respects. And in some respects, our PBS should be like that. We're preparing our mediators to take over as they step forward. Think about that. Think about the pace that we move at and how we're going to support people to develop their competence and confidence. Now, don't go data crazy, my ABA chums. Don't go data crazy. We want to seek the least to most principles when we're looking at data. Don't overburden people with data collection. Go as minimal as we can, least to most. Incorporate subjective accounts. It's really important. You know, we might talk about that social validity, but incorporate that. That's how the rest of the world works. It's how the rest of the world works. Data and subjective accounts. Bang on. Choose your data carefully. Be clear what you're taking data on and why. Think about the response effort from the people that you're working with. If this creates big, massive jobs for them, it's less likely that they're going to be motivated to engage with us. Don't use up all the goodwill. If you and your program are asking for data left, right, and centre, then that might cause problems with people that come next after you in those settings. So be mindful about what we're requiring services to do when we're offering the support that we do. Plan. Think carefully about the data that you're going to use, and also be clear about the use of fidelity data or process data or the use of lead measures in many respects. If we can help people pay attention to the processes here and we get good fidelity with the processes, then if we know those processes lead to the outcomes, that's some of the stuff that we really want systems to see, that paying attention to the processes is what's going to lead to the outcomes. So think very carefully about the data that you use. And sometimes, I know this is really difficult for some people, but maybe don't start with any data at all if that's what that setting needs. Spend time, work with your subjective accounts and shape it up. Shape it up. And again, that thing about kind of process standards there, in many respects, what you're also doing is helping with maintenance and generalization. You won't be there one day, and those mediators will continue to be there. Do they know how to correct things when they're going wrong? And sometimes the careful selection of data that we pay attention to can really help that system embed the processes going forward. You can have processes for how to evaluate problems too, right? The other big thing in terms of garnering support, even when you've got full support, when you're not encountering resistance, is be effective. Yeah. Would any of us continue to buy Apple products if they didn't work? No, they have to work first, right? The same with PBS. And again, this isn't just about you as individual practitioners. Think, if you're implementing a project at a large scale, organizational strategy perhaps, or within a trust or whatever it might be, have you got the right people doing the right jobs to give this the best chance of being successful? Because if that initial project isn't successful, I don't know how we're going to get people to then come on board and follow that. So think very carefully about the design of your project if it's larger. And again, when we're thinking about working with families, again, get in, be effective is the best way of garnering support. There's another one just in terms of that gradient support. So as we come out, you know, think about taking the stabilizers off. You wouldn't take the stabilizers off your children's bicycles until they were safe, or you thought they were getting safe. Same thing in many respects, grading our support out. If you kind of come out quickly and things start to change and there starts to be problems, then perhaps we haven't been clear enough about maintenance and generalization. So again, think about your support in and think about your support out. You can use probes to do this kind of stuff. You know, you can have a week where you don't have any input, perhaps with a family or with an organization, and see how they're getting on and ask and check in with people. And the next slide, I'm sorry about this grotesque image, but, you know, and I don't want to get all political or any of that kind of stuff. I don't mean to, but don't do a Donald. Yeah, that's one way of getting support. Don't do a Donald. Similar question to what I'd asked before. Are you the right person for the job right now? Excuse me, just checking time here. For example, if there's precision teaching needed as part of a school programme, I'm not going to do that. That's not my best skill. I'm going to find Thanos from the Tizard Centre or somebody else like that. Recent experience at a hospital, working with a hospital, and you know, they were talking about particular interviewing techniques for young females that had experienced trauma. I don't know anything about that either. I understand how to implement the PBS framework, but I'm going to need to engage those people to do the right jobs at the right time. Okay. How are we doing time-wise? Yeah, I'm going to rush through these last bits so I can get to a couple of these questions. Some of you guys might be familiar with this. This diagram is called the diffusion of innovation, and the line chart that you can see on it is about the hype cycle, or what other people might see as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Sorry, lots of stuff to chuck at you, but just quickly. What this is showing here is that the innovators, the researchers, expectations are really high because they've conducted their research in laboratory controlled type conditions and they've had great results. So everyone's dead chuffed about it and thinks it's going to be great. Then you've got the early adopters like us, people that take this on first, run with it. And what we find out is that actually implementing this stuff in the real world is more difficult than we thought. We're not able to get all the outcomes that we were from the research papers that we've seen. And then we have this trough of disillusionment down at the bottom. And some of us call that imposter syndrome, when we think, oh my God, can I do this? Everybody else seems to be doing it amazingly well. It's normal. It's completely normal. So if you're rolling out PBS anywhere and you're experiencing this trough of disillusionment, it's to be expected. What's really important is that early majority. How do we get that early majority to follow us? Resistance. So when you're experiencing resistance, these are the 4 key areas, I think, for me. Resistance is a spectrum. What we need to do, expect it, recognize it, understand it, and address it. Those are the 4 key areas for dealing with resistance. Recognizing resistance. Okay, we're all recognizing the faces of resistance. There's a great book by a chap called Peter Block called Flawless Consulting, and I've nicked some of his ideas for here. And he talks about examples of resistance, people that want loads of detail, people that are saying that there's not enough time to do this, the impracticality that we don't live in the real world, and that kind of stuff. You can get attack, silence, people just withdrawing from you, not responding to emails, etc., intellectualizing, constant questions about methodology, procrastinating, and that pressing for solutions. I don't want to hear any of this, just give me the solution, give me the solution, give me the solution. So again, recognize those as forms of resistance, name it to yourself, figure out what to do with it. Also, picking up on the cues is really important. Yeah, picking up on the cues, really important. And in his book, one of the things that he advises, he says, trust what you see more than what you hear. So people are avoiding meetings, people are, we can pick up on body language, hopefully. We're analytical in nature from what we do. Listen to yourself if you can feel yourself getting stressed, or if you feel yourself saying the same kind of things over and over again, recognize that and manage yourself. And also listen for repetition and telltale phrases with your clients. If people keep saying, you're not hearing me, listen to this, etc., etc. Those are all cues that you might be about to face resistance. Understanding resistance. It can be really confusing. So seek to understand is really important. You know, understanding is absolutely key. Do you understand where that resistance is coming from? And if not, do something to try and figure that out. If you work with a family, do the strategies challenge their values? If you're consulting to an organization, it's sometimes useful to understand the politics. There's lots of things going on with an organisation. Sometimes if you've been called in as a consultant, people might be concerned that that demonstrates they're not able to do their job, which we know is often not the case. But be cautious of that as you go in. Control is important for people. Autonomy is important for people. If they think their control and autonomy is being removed from them and you've been asked to take over, that can be threatening for some people. So understand some of that. Empathise with it. And remember that PBS has been thrust into the lives of some people, and that's a different challenge, and it needs a different kind of set of approaches in some respects. And beware the evangelists. You know, people evangelising that PBS or ABA and things like that are the only way to do things. It's not. It's a great way of doing things. It's a fantastic way of doing things, but it's not the only way. Listen, understand other people's approaches, and if we can help them with their approaches, even better. Sorry, I know I'm rushing a bit. I definitely want to leave some time to answer some of the questions. So, dealing with a little bit of resistance. Okay, what do we do if we're encountering some of the resistance? Well, the first thing, like snakes and ladders, go back to step one. Have you done those first 7 things that we just spoke about before? If not, go back and have a look to see if any of those can help you. Were you clear about contextual fit? Have people got the resources to implement what they want to, etc., etc., etc.? Spend time discussing with people, try and find out what the issue is. The concept of an appreciative inquiry, I love. Sitting down with people and not talking about problems, but saying, tell me, what would this place be like on its perfect day? What would happen? What would you like to see happen? And when we can start having some of those conversations, so it's not identifying the problems with the system, it's identifying what people want to look at, what they want to develop, then we can create what we call a buying environment and not a selling environment. So me as a PBS practitioner, I'm not trying to sell PBS to you. I'm not trying to sell it anymore. Once we've done that appreciative inquiry and people have talked about what they want and what they want to achieve, then perhaps we can offer some suggestions around what PBS, how we might be able to help. And then people start asking, oh, could you help us with the debriefing? Could you help us with the incident report form writing? And that can be your inroad there sometimes. Think about quick wins and think about demonstration projects. If you can negotiate to work on a small area, if you're experiencing resistance, sometimes people are worried about what's coming. Put your money where your mouth is, develop a demonstration project and show PBS's worth in those settings in a small way, you know, great way of developing. Develop that therapeutic relationship. We need to have good relationships with the people that we work with. And again, Leah's going to talk about that a lot. And finally, ask for help. It's not a bad thing to ask for help. This is difficult work sometimes in difficult circumstances. Asking for help is a smart move. I was having a challenge recently and I reached out to Andy Bamber, who you're going to be hearing from later, because he's got more experience in some of those settings than I have. And I reached out to ask for him. And at first it's a little bit, I was like, I'm a bit embarrassed asking, I'm a bit embarrassed about it. It's ridiculous to be embarrassed about it. You know, if I want to be good at my job and I want to serve the people that we support well, then I need to get over that and I need to go and ask people how to help in certain circumstances. Here's a big one. There's a saying that we say in football, play the ball and not the man. And you can find this happening sometimes, particularly in highly charged political type situations, is that people are disagreeing with each other and this becomes personal. Don't let it become personal, especially not for you. This is not personal. If you're experiencing resistance, it can feel really personal to you. It's not. It's about the other side. It's about what's going on there. Now, we can't make the other side do anything. The only person we can change is us. The only approaches we can change are our approaches. So think about what you might be able to change to make an impact on that other side when you're experiencing resistance. Just quickly, I just want to do a bit of a weird exercise for you. We'll do it just quickly, okay? If you can, and I'm not saying this is a fix-all, it's just an example, all right? If you put your hands together for me, if you could, and push, equal resistance, equal hands going, pushing, pushing, pushing. Now, stop, have a refresh, okay? Put your hands back together and push. Now, allow one hand to push all the way to the other side. It's free. I don't know about you, but I actually can't push that far. The resistance doesn't go too far until it stops. And I think I've had a recent experience of this recently too, is sometimes you need to let resistance blow its course out. It's not about you, it's about that current context. Give it some space. The more I was engaging with that resistance at times, the more you get embroiled in it. Sometimes you need to stand back and let that blow out, and then it's time for you to come in. So manage yourself. And almost finally, the Dunning-Kruger effect, something we spoke about earlier, okay? The good news here, this is similar to the imposter syndrome, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect. And at the beginning of things, if you look over on that far side, at the beginning of things, your confidence might be high. When you're at university, you're learning all this stuff, you think, that's amazing, it's great, I'm going to go out and change the world. Then you get into your practice and it's hard. It's hard. There's real world problems going on out there. This is the really exciting bit. If you keep pushing through, if you acknowledge your kind of shortcomings and you keep pushing through and you learn how to deal with this, you get better. You get better at it and you get more confident at it when you're in difficult situations. And I think progress for me has been a bit like this. I've had times when it's gone really well, times when I'm back down, up, down, up, down. Keep getting up, keep moving forward and keep learning. The key to this is knowledge and experience. Keep trying, get better, don't be perfect. You're seeking to get better, not perfect. And that's the exciting thing. You're going to develop your skills as you keep grinding through this. So, summary points: be proactive and engage key stakeholders in assessment, planning, intervention, and evaluation. It's key. If you haven't, go back to that. Address contextual fit issues. So again, is there the resource availability? Is there readiness for implementation? Is there capacity to implement? If not, go back and think about that again. And finally, recognize, understand, and address resistance. It's sometimes let it blow out, maybe, but most times you're going to need to address it. You don't always need to call that out, but recognize it and address it in your head. And for really difficult things, often the way to do it is to call it out. It's not going to get better unless you do. We'll put our big boy and big girl pants on and attack this. But remember, great quote from Carl Jung: know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. We're dealing with people here. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Be good to people. Be empathetic, understanding, and they're likely to come on board with you. Okay, so that's from me. We've got a little bit of time left to answer questions. I'm amazed. I'm well pleased with that. If anyone's interested, we will be sharing the slides, I believe, and I'll put all the references on there. So if anybody wants any of those references at all, we can have a look at that. So I'm just going to quickly jump into the Q&A. Thank you for staying around. I can see that almost everybody stayed around. That's amazing. Can we have the recording? Yes, you're trying to get a young lady up and dressed. Good luck. Yeah. What about implied support and disguised resistance? Yeah, good question, Dave. I think that, as we mentioned there, recognize it, kind of name it, speak to people about it if you can. You know, there's a bunch of different ways of doing that. Sometimes I'll recognize it and I might have some strategies for how to try and approach that. Sometimes we need to raise it directly with people and say, I'm getting a lot of implied support, but I'm not getting a lot of action around that support. And again, that's where sometimes some of that data can be helpful. So again, I think it's difficult, but name it. And also, again, like I say, have we been through stages 1 to 7 too? Anonymous, how important is the relational aspect of working relationships when working with key change agents? I suppose there's some parallels when working with supporting people. You've nailed it. You've nailed it. You know, when we work with people with autism, learning disabilities, mental health conditions, whatever it might be, one of my first approaches is, I want this person to trust me. You know, I want this person to trust me. And again, I think that's really important with our work, with the other professionals that we work with, or the other families that they work with. They need to trust us. So there's something about being authentic, and you're right, the parallel's exactly the same. The name of the book and the author was Peter Block, Flawless Consulting. However, individual approaches erode consistency and can lead to I'm the only one that do this. Approaches need to make individual. You're absolutely right, Dave Jones. Yeah. So again, PBS is about teamwork. It's about partnerships. It's not about us. It's not about you. You know, and we've all seen those kind of consultants that are, yeah, enjoy getting all the applause and all that kind of stuff. Simon, hiya Simon, lovely to hear from you. Yeah, thoughts about bridging the gap from inpatient to community. Really great question. And I think that the answer to that really is around engaging the key stakeholders in many respects. So we have been really fortunate on the back of some of the system-wide training to do some work with kind of Bristol, and their commissioners are really well engaged. They've already run some pilot projects around transitioning people out of hospital, and they're now working with us to kind of refine the next stages of the project. So I think that it's about small demonstration projects where we pool resources, we ensure that we can kind of deliver that with fidelity, and know that that's not going to be perfect first time around. And the point of the pilot is to recognise where we might need to make changes and improvements to that for the people that come behind that. I hope that helps, but if not, give us a shout, because I'm sure the Bristol guys would be happy to chat about that. They're doing some really quite incredible work at the minute, and yeah, I think sharing that good practice would be really key. But for me, I think demonstration projects, I know some of your roles, Simon, it's a big role, you know, so I'd perhaps be looking to see if we can develop a demonstration project. Netta, thanks very much, mate. Love you to bits. It's nice to hear from you. Tamsin, how do you deal with negative comments about PBS? Yeah, previously unencountered this with ABA, but recently been PBS. I listen to them, Tamsin. I listen to them and I try and understand them, and also don't disagree with all of them. You know, they might be fair. Some of them, you know, the conversations around ABA that's caused trauma for people. I know that's a really visceral thing for many people. All I can say on that is that if that has been someone's experience, I'm awfully sorry that they've experienced that. I'm awfully sorry they've experienced that, but that doesn't represent all of ABA, and it doesn't represent all of PBS. So I think we move forward, Tamsin, with having discussions with people around that, and not trying to win an argument. Have a genuine discussion with people, you know, to find out what their challenges are, see if we can spend time with people. Also get support from other people that have dealt with those kind of issues previously, I think, as well. But it's a great question, and you're going to experience negative comments about ABA and PBS. If you're going to be a good practitioner, like all of us are trying to be, you need to learn how to have those conversations. And again, if you want to garner support and influence people as we move forward, we have to be conscious about that. So yeah, if we all want to continue to garner support and make it easier for future generations, we must continue to research, share success, good practice, admit failings, be honest about it and be clear about it. Develop adaptive iterations to develop support in whatever your context is, whether that's strategy, policy, practice, and foster healthy, positive relationships with those from other disciplines. Tamsin, similar to your question, sometimes I've learned I need to take 2 steps back before I can take a couple of steps forward, and that's all right. All the time that I was not prepared to take 2 steps back, nobody moved anywhere forward. So listen and engage. Guys, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you joining us. You're going to have a great day, I think, on this area. Listen to Leah's talk if you can, and probably some of Nick's as well, about building habits. Essentially, when we're doing PBS, we're trying to help people to create new habits. Thank you all so very much. I hope you have a lovely day, and for people I haven't seen for a while, miss you guys, and I really hope to see you all soon. All right, thanks very much, folks. Bye now.